It's our 14th year of doing this. It's our top 10 marketing moments of 2024. There's plenty been happening, as you are, I'm sure, as well as aware as I am. And so over the next 10 very festive days, we'll run down in descending order, ascending order from 10 to 1, the 10 big marketing moments, and what I think as marketers we should take from it for the year. So we're going to start with our countdown today with number 10, which is, of course, Coke's AI Christmas turkey. Let me explain. A relatively recent one, only from a couple of weeks ago. So as I'm sure you've probably seen, Coca-Cola have supplemented their, again, 15 euros, I think now, of running their holidays are coming big red truck ad. And they run that ad to great success, as we'll see later this week in our top 10 countdown, but they supplement it with something else. And this year, of course, they supplemented it with an AI version. Apparently they briefed actually in the end, 4 different AI things to produce an edit which is completely constructed, obviously, from artificial intelligence. And it spurred much debate. Let's watch the ad first. It's a minute long. And then we'll talk about the debate that ensued as a result. But first, let's get into the ad. Now, there's a lot to think about there. I mean, critics have noticed that, the wheels go in the wrong direction and one of the ducks has one leg. It's pretty good by current AI standards, but it's been interesting that, in particular, Campaign magazine has elected it as turkey or Christmas turkey of the week. So, as you know, Campaign, the venerable advertising magazine of the UK and elsewhere, has a turkey of the week in which the editorial team or a notable advertising persona picks an ad that they think is crap and explains why it's crap. And a couple of weeks ago, it was this specific Coke ad that was voted as being crap. And Campaign, they didn't hold back on this, right? They're a ghost of Christmas past. There was no discernible story in the ad. It was very soulless, and the warmth and humanity had all been sucked out. So there's a problem increasingly with this. They did this last year with Amazon's ad as well, if you remember. Campaign magazines got it wrong here, and they're in a dangerous place, in my opinion. Nobody cares what Campaign magazine thinks about this ad, because whoever's writing it, lovely as they are, is just one person, not representative of the market. And even worse, they come from the industry, and therefore their perspective is almost entirely skewed. We don't care what someone who works in a professional magazine thinks about this. When it comes to the tactics themselves, what we care about is what the market might say. And therein we have a problem. Because, of course, the world of testing ads and pre-testing ads and gathering empirical data about ads has come on tremendously in the last 5 to 10 years. I'm going to talk mostly about System 1. They dominate the landscape, and they will continue to do so, is my prediction. But we should mention, other testing systems are available, most notably with Kantar. But it's System 1 that have pioneered the quick, effective, editorially released data. And what System 1 have taught us, among many other things that will come back into our list later, is that this ad is very good. I mean, if you look at the brand building scale, System 1 used to predict how well will an ad go on to build brand, This is pretty much as good as it gets, 5.9 on the 6-point scale. And I mean, it's not quite the same ad as the original Holidays Are Coming Out. It's a variant of it. But as you can see, that ad has been not only wildly successful year after year, it's got more successful as consumers have got more familiar with it. Now, we'll talk in a few days in the top 10 about that phenomenon and the contradiction between marketers who want to create something new each year and consumers who actually prefer old stuff. That's not my point here. My point here, thanks to System One, is that that ad is good. And if campaign think it's a turkey, they're wrong. And the market always gets the final judgment, right? We work in marketing, and the clue is in the name, right? The market always gets to decide. And so what was interesting was kind of anticipating this. System One campaign also took a pop at System One. And this is starting to happen from a few agency people and obviously from campaign. They're starting to get pissed off because not only are their opinions jarring with System One's approach is kind of making them look a bit foolish, in my opinion. So this was the comment in the original Turkey column at the end about System One, because they'd already released the fact that, in contrast with campaign, they really thought it was rather good. Campaign said, but look, you don't need to listen to campaign. System One's research has already given this ad maximum marks, along with 9 other Christmas ads from this year. It is standard in British universities to never give anyone more than 90% because an essay simply cannot be that perfect. But advertising has been cracked, solved, and these films are as good as is humanly possible. Well, either that or there's an issue with someone's system. So it's snarky bullshit, in my opinion, because it's kind of pathetic in a way. You know, they're saying, well, how can System One be correct when there's 8 ads have all performed well, and compared to any assessment, like when we did our A levels, that can't be right. I would suggest an alternative explanation for why we have so many highly ranked ads this year. It's because System One have been measuring this properly. System One have been helping many of the companies to improve their ads to get higher scores, more effectiveness. And generally, marketers are learning, partly thanks to System One, what works and what doesn't work. Because you can learn fuck all from a columnist telling you what they don't like about an ad. But you can learn a lot from more empirical data and diagnostic information. So I think, Campaign's a fine magazine, don't get me wrong, but they're on the wrong side of history. And they're doubling down, Miss McCabe is a fine columnist as well. The problem is System One. The problem is System One is they've got data, yeah? And data versus opinion is not a fair fight, right? And I think we're in a very, very dangerous place at the moment in how parts of the industry representing advertising agencies are talking about pre-testing. So let's talk about 2 things about this one. First of all, let's just briefly review the most important concept in marketing, which is market orientation. Yeah, you can't do marketing without a real understanding of market orientation. We must stop looking at consumers and indeed advertising as well, and look at how they see things, because that's the only perspective that matters. And that's a crucial 180. When you do that properly, that 180, what you begin to realize is a lot of the things you thought aren't just inaccurate, they're completely wrong. Most companies define their competition incorrectly because they didn't ask customers who they were actually thinking about, rather than some self-defined list. In my experience, companies have this wildly inaccurate view of which touch points are most important in driving service perceptions. And when you do the 180, you learn shit that didn't matter at all. Windows are far more important than shit that everyone's focused on, advertising. Yeah, it's a classic market orientation lesson. A general one, but a big one. I think we've lived the last 10 years with a very non-market oriented approach to the importance of brands. I think because we all work on brands 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, we've started to believe that brands are super important to people's lives. My brand is important to the lives of my consumer. People care about my brand of baked beans stance on racial intolerance. And of course, that's horseshit, right? And I can prove it to you. Stop being a marketer, do your own 180. Go to your fridge, go and pause this, go to your fridge and open the door and have a look inside, right? Gaze at all the things you have, not as a marketer, but as a consumer purchased. Now, how many of them do you have any real passion for? I mean, I'm not saying you don't like them, but do you care about the brand that much? Do you really care about their take on planetary, endangerment? And the answer is, unfortunately, you really don't, right? We've overstated this because we work on brands all the time, and we forgot that consumers really don't give a toss. I worked for a brand this year that got delisted in one of the big British supermarkets, and the lovely but now incredibly unrealistic brand manager was telling me that consumers were going to protest when they discovered that her beautiful brand had been deleted from supermarket shelves. And of course, not only were there no protests, nobody noticed. Yeah, and it's a perfect example of what's been going on in overstatement. And I'll come back to this again later as we do our countdown in the next few days. We have to fix brand positioning because it's totally and utterly not fit for purpose. And it comes from the same problem, which is we're building these decks and these books with characteristics and personas and purpose and attributes and, all this stuff, word upon word upon word, filled with horseshit, right? And it's not what the job's meant to be. We have a tiny, if we're lucky, target in the consumer's head where she'll give us 4 seconds a year, and we're trying to stuff a manifesto in there about all kinds of shit they don't care about. We really is a victim of market orientation. And again, I'm going to sing, as usual, a half enthusiastic version of Ehrenberg Bass's hymn sheet here. Salience. What's our most important job in whoever you are in marketing? It's to bring the brand to mind, yeah? In the buying situations that generate sales. You don't get that if you're not market oriented because you go, well, look, our brand is out there, man. Everybody thinks about it. I think about my brand all the time. It's out everywhere. No, you work in a company where the logo is emblazoned in large letters at the top of the building and you see it 25 times an hour dotted around your office, right? That's not how the consumer has it. And when you do the 180, suddenly you realize, oh shit, my consumer's completely forgotten about my brand. Hence the importance of salience. And back to the point of Turkey of the Week and Coca-Cola, I don't care what an agency thinks about its advertising. And I don't care what the company thinks about it. And I certainly don't care what advertising journalists think about it. What does the data say has to be ultimately our default. Now, we all fall into this, right? I've spent many a happy column banging on about stuff from my opinion. We all have to be very cautious, particularly when data does exist, that we defer back to it. And when we defer back to it, we're leaning on a bigger and bigger literature. So pre-testing has changed. That's my message to all marketers, okay? I've worked for 2 types of CMO, marketing director, over the last 20 odd years, okay? The first type, who I probably sided with more often than not, when they're asked about pre-testing, would have said to me basically, look, I've got a great agency. I did all my market research and diagnosis to set up my marketing plan. I've built that strategy from it, and I've briefed my agency well. I'm one of the small proportion of marketers that can do that. I trust these guys. I hired them to do their work. I'm not going to research the shit out of this. Research kills creativity. It ruins the surprise and the magic and yada, 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 okay? I listened to that opinion, and it was probably the one that I followed the most. But there was always another type of marketer. And she would say, look, I research everything, right? Why wouldn't I research the one thing I spend more of my budget on than anything else? I want it to be as right as possible before I send it out there. The costs of research are a fraction, a percentage point of my media budget. It helps me to get buy-in. And it isn't just a go, no go. Do you know what I mean? I can get diagnostic advice from good pre-testing that will help make it better. Yeah. And overall, it will speed up the process because it'll help tell me what does and doesn't work and whether to go, no go. Both these people had a point 10 years ago. My message to Campaign Magazine is you need to update your perspective. real quick, because pre-testing is not what it was 10 years ago. We've all sat through shithouse pre-testing. Now, what pre-test, if you're younger, let me explain. If you go back 20 years, what pre-testing was is a junior person in the agency would do a cartoon, like sketch of the proposed ad, right? And not making this up, many occasions, someone would then stand behind the giant sheet of paper with the cartoon and they would do the voices, hello, oh, hello, I'm here to buy a blah, blah, blah. And they'd act it out right behind the paper. And the 8 randos that the agency had found off the street would then be asked, would that make you want to buy the product or not? I mean, it was horseshit, right, for the most part. What's changed in the last 10 years is pretty much everything. We can now create digital animatics, thanks to our friends in Seoul, South Korea, which cost very little money, but which pretty much capture in cartoon format, moving cartoon format, the exact proposed storyboard. We can recruit a perfect representative sample of the target audience. So we can get, people that do DIY regularly at weekends, and we can ask a representative sample of 350 of them with a standard, not standard deviation, but with the numbers possible to make them representative. And we can do non-verbal assessment. Yeah, asking people, is this ad good, is one way to do it. But as System 1 and other test companies are now able to do, to measure emotional response as a much better proxy for how people are responding to the ad. We can get our results back in 24 to 36 hours from a representative sample. And here's the key point. I can talk to you all day about pre-testing. It doesn't matter. Their stuff is predictive, right? Campaigns' personal opinions ain't predictive, but System 1 and the other testing companies are increasingly predictive. And I'll tell you a story to illustrate that, okay? So I was conscious that I was singing System 1's praises very strongly for the last couple of years. And I thought, well, we have to be sure that it's kosher, So I went and talked to Sky in the UK. Now, if you don't know, Sky are a pretty advanced marketing company on most levels, right? They have an academy. They spend a lot of money on econometric research. In my opinion, and the opinion of most people, they do it right. Yeah, they spend a lot of money and they do it right. So I went and talked to Sky. Sky were very skeptical of System 1, and Sky do a lot of tests on all of the advertising they run, and they run a lot of their own advertising because they're promoting, different packages and signups and so on. So they actually had 40 ads that they'd run in the last 5 years that they tested after having aired the ad with econometric, as part of their econometric analysis. And they had a pretty good idea, therefore, which of these ads had sold the movie package, which ones had helped to build brand. They'd really learned and understood. They were very skeptical that System 1 could have that kind of power, particularly because, even before the ad was run. But System 1 measure every video ad in the UK. So Sky talked to System 1 and said, how many of these 40 ads have you got in your database? How many did you test? And pretty much all of them was the answer. And so Sky challenged System 1, show us what you think these ads would have done to our business, long and short, and we'll compare it to our data. And, Sky, like me, have no money or investment in System 1. And the reaction was astonishment that System 1 were incredibly accurate in their predictions versus what Sky actually found had happened. It's the real deal. And I think Campaign Magazine needs to lead its industry into accepting pre-testing has changed, pre-testing is good, pre-testing is now something that the industry has to rely on. Because if you're going to spend more than 100 grand on advertising, clearly you should be spending 10 grand working out if it's any good or not and how to fix it before you launch the ad. And I'm tired. This year we've had a number of advertising people critiquing System 1 on the basis of research that was published in the 90s and noughties before System 1 existed, right? It's horseshit. So I think it's time for us to accept, first of all, that Coke's AI ad was very good. Second, that Campaign Magazine is off the pace. Third, that pre-testing has changed, and don't be caught up by old-fashioned points of view that miss that point. And finally, as we always recognize, market orientation is at the fundamental core of our discipline when we're doing it right. Let's move to our next big topic, which of course Number 9, Liquid Death's iconic ever-present status. So you will have noticed this like me, okay? At every marketing event this year, uh, 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 in any marketing article on LinkedIn, there has been this fanboy adoration of basically of Liquid Death being more important than any other brand on the planet. Yeah, and it started to annoy me about February, and it got pretty bad, right? So I wrote a very helpful Marketing Week column in the middle of the year, pointing out a couple of things, right? First of all, Liquid Death's global revenues this year would be about $250 million. God knows that's impressive, but it ain't exactly the world's biggest brand. Coke does it about every 72 hours. Second, until 2024, the brand had not been profitable. Now, I know it's cool not to be profitable, thanks to Jeff Bezos, and I sort of semi get that, but I semi don't as well. One of my favorite leaders of all time was Alan Mulally, who ran Ford, who was one of my heroes. And Alan's point about, he was always told there were certain brands in his portfolio that weren't profitable yet, and that was okay. And he's from, originally from Ohio, he's an engineer. And then he'd say to him in a really nice, friendly way, my point of view is if a brand isn't making money, there's something wrong with it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Liquid Death, but if we're going to venerate and celebrate a brand over and over again in marketing, could we pick one that's making a profit? Is that too much to ask for? But I guess my more complex point, which was missed by pretty much everyone, is I kind of like Liquid Death. I think it is a very high potential, interesting little brand that could grow into a very great one down the track. Let's see. The point of my article and my criticism wasn't Liquid Death. It was all the marketers that thought Liquid Death was the epitome of marketing success. And I just want to make it clear. I want to quote myself, which is, always uncomfortable, because that's what the column did say originally. Here's my bit here saying that. Make no mistake, Cesario, who's the founder, deserves a shit ton of credit. Anyone who can grow a brand as fast and as successfully as this is worthy. And Liquid Death is a fine minor brand with some potential. But by early 2024, it became apparent that the global marketing community was, once again, getting things completely out of proportion. So my criticism wasn't Liquid Death. Again, fine brand. My criticism was, can we stop talking about Liquid Death this much? Because it's not all that. It really isn't that cool. And very fine people like Will and other people completely missed the point and went, Liquid Death's great, man. Liquid Death's fantastic and all of that. Yeah, it's a great brand. It's you that I'm having a go at, Will. It's not Liquid Death. And another column about Liquid Death doesn't solve the problem. It exemplifies my point. So what is my point? Okay. So come back to my 3 jingly Christmas balls of happiness, yeah? When I train our marketers and brand managers on the mini MBA program, we build it all around this structure. And the structure is you start with diagnosis, yeah? And diagnosis, market orientation, doing market research, segmenting the market. When you've done all that and understood, we can move to strategy. And strategy is all about building targeting and positioning, distinctive assets, codes, and developing the right objectives, which is crucial. And then finally, we get to the bit all marketers love, which is tactics, yeah? Now, I believe, I know, and we'll talk about this again this week in my top 10, that tactics do break down still to the 4 Ps, right? That what marketers should, I'm not saying are, but should be doing is, first of all, not reformulating the 4 Ps and adding purpose and push and passion and all that shit. What they should have done is just paid attention to the original 4 Ps and realized that's what we do. They're the tactical joysticks. We work on the product, on the price, on the place or distribution, and yes, the promotional communication one as well, the 4 Ps. But we don't see that in marketing, and it's getting worse every year. What we see is, first of all, just tactics with no strategic thought behind them. And usually we don't even see tactics. We just see one of the 4 tactics, the promotional P or comms. Most marketers in this country aren't marketers, and I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. Most marketers are just advertising people. They work in the communications field. Now, they don't know that because no one's told them, but about 400 times a day, people mistake marketing and advertising as if they're the same thing. Marketing is the subcontinent of our discipline, and advertising is a small town, yeah, on the periphery. You can't mix those 2 things up. And I'll show you evidence of why I'm so troubled by Liquid Death's popularity. Because Liquid Death clearly is literally is a can of water with really cool advertising, yeah, and organic comms. I mean, no doubt their ads are fantastic. They excel at it, right? But you can see why marketers love that kind of brand and why that's the one they focus on rather than brands that are doing great product pricing or more strategic work as part of their success. So this is the results from the CMO survey in the UK. If I showed you the results from the US, they'd be very similar. And the CMO survey talks to the big CMOs of each respective country, in the UK's case 80, and it says to them, as you can see here, what's marketing primarily responsible for? Well, the good news, first of all, things like brand and advertising, more than 90% of marketers in these teams are involved in that. And that's no surprise because that's our red friend here. But when the survey asks them things like, how many of your team are involved in pricing? What we find is, as you can see here, 80% of them, 4/5 of them, are involved in pricing, right? Or are certainly not directly involved in it. When we ask about product development, the figure drops to 1/4. So 3/4 aren't involved in new product development. We have these product managers, product marketers. That role wouldn't need to exist if marketers actually understood what their proper job was. We have to create product marketers because what we're saying is, oh, they're not the marketers that just do comms. These guys do product, right? Because we've stopped doing it for the most part. And same with distribution, which drops to nearly single digits in this case, right? 90% of marketers aren't involved in distribution. So we've lost, while we were monkeying around with our Ps and adding, pornography and pleasure and petit fours and having these debates about, we should add these to the Ps, right? Our traditional Ps were leaving the building and going off with other lovers, and we may never get them back, right? I tire very much of marketers who go, it's not realistic to talk about marketing being involved in the Ps, like pricing. That doesn't happen. My message is it does happen, but only in good companies where marketers know what they're doing. And I get very tired of shit marketers working for shit companies telling everyone marketing isn't involved in pricing. In your company, maybe, but there is still some hope out there, and there are some good marketers still left. And to be fair to the other marketers out there that are just communications people, and you don't have to do it with me, my message is really simple. Learn marketing, yeah? Around 25% of British marketers have marketing training, proper marketing training. You don't know what you're missing, right? You don't know what you're missing. So come and do a course, and it doesn't have to be mine, but it could be mine, where we teach pricing as much as we teach advertising. We teach product development as much as we teach communications, because that's how it's meant to be, and that's how it works best. And our next pit stop is going to be into the wonderful, wonderful world of McDonald's. So, McDonald's pricing gotcha. I wasn't sure what to call this one. So let me step back. So 3 key insights that I'd like to share with you about general business, not just marketing, okay? First of all, it's about profit. Yeah, it's not about revenues. Be very careful when people talk to you about sales and don't mention the profit that is generated by those sales. Let me explain. I could take this fine China mug and I could sell it on eBay for £2, right? It's a British transport mug for £2. And I would have generated revenues. Hallelujah. But this mug cost me £12 online, right? So I haven't done the thing I have to do, which is make money, yeah? I've actually lost money. Do you see my point? Generating revenue is child's play. Making money, taking a £12 mug and selling it for £25, that involves skill. That involves strategy. That involves marketing. Yeah? So first of all, it's all about profit, not about revenue. Second lesson, price drives profit more than anything else, right? Getting more sales doesn't drive profit like price does, okay? Saving money doesn't drive profit like price does, okay? I'll show you some evidence in a minute. So if number one is it's all about profit, number two is price is how we get to that profit, okay? Let me demonstrate that point for a second. So One of the great studies of all time, it's been done several times actually by the smart pricing boffins at Wharton, was to look with empirical data at about 2,500 industries and look at the implications of trying to generate more profit. So they looked at the four main levers of profit, which would be reducing variable cost. So let's say, let's take mini MBA's example. We stopped sending out diaries to each student. We just let them make their own notes. Fixed costs. So we get rid of half of our marketing team, or we shut down our office. Alternatively, we can put up our price by 20% or 5%, or we could increase sales and go into Germany and try and get another 50% of sales, right? The question that the Wharton guys asked when they looked at different companies' financial operations was, if we did all of these by 1%, what's the implication on profitability? So if we take the first one, right? If you look at fixed costs, for example, right? If we reduce our fixed costs by 1%, the implication for profitability is our overall profit of the company on average will go up by 2%. If we increase sales by 1%, on average, our overall profitability goes up 4%. If we get our variable costs down by 1%, it will knock up our profits overall by 6%. But if I can get our prices up by 1%, and assuming again no tail off on demand, we will achieve a goal, a profit implication of 10%. Why is that? Well, it's real simple. When you increase prices by 1%, profits don't increase by 1% too, because you've got all that cost structure underneath it, yeah? And that marginal difference can be sensational. There are businesses where it's a lot more than 10%. I was working with a retailer this week. It's actually 20% for a 1% increase. So be aware of that asymmetry. Also be aware, by the way, that if we reverse this stuff and you start reducing your price for whatever reason, it has exactly the same impact in reverse. A 10% price reduction doesn't reduce your profits by 10%. Go run the numbers. It pretty much eviscerates all profit. In fact, you might be losing money by the time you're finished, okay? So my point is, one, it's all about profit. Two, price is the way that we drive it, okay? So here's McDonald's, which for me is possibly the most impressive overall marketing operation on the planet and has been for the last 10 years. It's one of them, yeah? We talked yesterday about Liquid Death, fine little brand. Hello, big, fat, incredible McDonald's. You want to see what real marketing looks like and what Liquid Death has to grow into? It would be McDonald's. Why do I say that? Okay, so what you see up here on this top line here, as you can see there, that's their total global revenue in billions of quid. And beneath it here is their total gross profit. It's not gross margin, it's gross profit. Okay, let's take a year just to illustrate what that demonstrates. So if we go back 10 years to 2014, you'll see that McDonald's had a great year. They generated $28 billion of revenue, and off the back of that, $11 billion of profit, right? That's nice, isn't it? Isn't it? Now, if we zoom forward to current times, to 2024, you'll see that, oh, what a shame, revenues have actually dipped a little bit. They're actually down to $26 billion, yeah? But you'll know here, oh, look, even though there was less revenue, their profits have gone up to $15 billion. So let's be clear what that means, right? In the 10 years, the last 10 years, McDonald's revenues are down 7%, but their profits, hallelujah, are up 36%. Why is that? Well, most obviously, that's because the overall gross margin that McDonald's have been able to charge has increased significantly. Why is that? Well, because McDonald's are good at pricing, not pricing. So the first thing to remember in all of this is there is a price for every product or service, and marketers tend to look at it as some magical thing sent down from heaven, which they just stick at the end of the gondola, right? There's the price. It came from God. My message to marketers would be, let's get involved in it and let's make price the central point in pricing. And pricing is something marketers can and should be involved in. So what do I mean by pricing? Well, I mean, first of all, before we get to price, we need to do price research. And I'm going to sound a bit cynical here, and you're going to have to trust me. Most companies set price using a combination of stupid things, okay? And just because it's been done by finance, don't get scared, don't get intimidated, don't go, ooh, they've got all these words like gross margin and ooh, what does that mean? There's two ways most of these finance people are doing it. Number one, they're looking at their cost of goods, often incorrectly. They're applying a markup of 20 or 30%, and that's how they get into their price. That's the most common way, cost plus. The other way they're doing it, which is slightly more stupid, is they're looking at their competitor and going, they're charging X, we'll charge Y, okay? That's dumb for all kinds of reasons. First, they're often not your main competitor. You're benchmarking against someone that doesn't exist. Second, the consumer doesn't know what the competitor's charging either. Third, your competitor's probably got it wrong too, right? Fourth, they may be offering a completely different thing. So for all those reasons, they're the two stupid ways. What's the smart way? The smart way is go and talk to the consumers that you're targeting with what you're selling and find out what they're prepared to pay. Now, that's not simple. You can't just ask them. But there are techniques and approaches, starting with conjoint and Van Westendorp and experimentation, that can give you incredible certainty on where the right place to price is. It's never perfect, but it can get pretty close to certainty if you invest a bit of time and you have the expertise to do it. Now, the problem with that approach, that obvious win, let's do some research on consumers, is finance people can't do that, see, because they don't know anything about market research, okay? Who knows about market research? Oh, I know. Marketing people know how to do market research. That was our role in this process, first of all, yeah, to provide the research. I'm not saying we should be in charge of pricing. I'm saying we should be helping in the process, almost like we are grown up and involved in big decisions, yeah? And there's a second part to pricing. Once we've done the research to set the price, let me talk about this, okay? It is very important to talk about this. It is clear from my journeys and experiences of being involved with pricing in various places in the world with various products, there is one truth that stands out. The way we present a price, the way we communicate a price, the way we frame or anchor a price is more important than the actual level of price itself. Most consumers don't know what something should or is meant to cost, yeah? If we control the perception of price through our communication, we have indelible power over the process. And that's why, if you tuned in yesterday, I'm so heartbroken at the fact that 80% of marketing teams aren't involved in pricing because we can't do this red shit. And as a result, we're almost certainly leaving a lot of money on the table. Because there's also great research showing that when you set price without consumer data, you invariably underprice. You go for volume over value, and you're leaving tons of money on the table. Yeah. So this is very depressing because it's not just, oh, marketers should be involved in pricing, because, marketers should be involved in pricing because we bring incredible inputs into the process that no one else can bring, provided you're a real marketer and you don't just work in comms. Let me demonstrate that last point using Dan Ariely's famous experience with The Economist, okay? It's still the best way to explain this concept of framing and anchoring, okay? So Ariely's point was, he once, and I'm going to do it back to front, okay? So when you present potential subscribers of The Economist with a couple of options, option one was you can subscribe to The Economist website for $59 a year, or you can subscribe to a combination package of access to the website and The Economist magazine. The end result is about 2/3 of people go, oh, you know what, I'll take the cheaper option and I'll just take the web subscription. About a third choose both, okay? Now, Ariely's point was, when you introduce that third option, which is just the print subscription for $125, everything changes. Now, first of all, no, it's a dummy, right? Because no one's going to go for that when for $125 you can obviously get the print and the website. And sure enough, when he asked his students which one they'd go for, quite thankfully, nobody went for it. But that's not the point. We're not talking about actual prices. We're talking about framing and anchoring and decoying, in this case, prices. When you introduce that third option, it changed the context of pricing, the way prices are perceived, despite the numbers remaining the same. And sure enough, Now only 16% of people wanted to go for the .com subscription, and 84% went for the combination, because suddenly that context effect, that framing effect, changed the perception of value. If you run the numbers on what that's worth in terms of getting people to go from 32% of the market choosing it to 84 with an incremental value of nearly $70, right? It's worth tens of millions of dollars down the track. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about price communication and framing, okay? So how are McDonald's doing this in their world? You may have noticed over the last decade that McDonald's menus in each of their venues has become more and more electronic and visual. That's not just because it's cool and you can have animations and shit. It's because we have much more potential now to move and frame and cluster prices. And it gives us, a whole different world of pricing impact upon consumers as they're stood there. So a few things you might notice that behavioral economists have pointed out. When you approach, I send you to McDonald's tonight to do your homework, right? When you approach a McDonald's, you'll discover the first thing you see as you walk in or even through the drive-through is there'll be certain products being highlighted, usually without price. So this is a way of decision anchoring you at the beginning, setting the context at the very start, right? I do this with mini MBA. I talk about an MBA costing 200 grand in 2 years. I set that very clearly as the tone. And then I talk about mini MBA, which costs 2 grand and only takes 12 weeks. And everyone's like, God, that's amazing, right? Compared to that. You see what I mean? That's what McDonald's are doing sometimes with their visual stuff up front. And then these LED menus that are going on behind us here are doing all kinds of stuff, yeah? We're seeing attention cues where we're pulling people one place away from another. Because remember, the big danger is you go into Macca's and you order what you normally order. Now, that might be good, in which case we'll make it happen. But if I can trade you up and trade you across, I'm going to do that. I'm going to frame your decision by showing you other alternatives that push you up or across to other elements in the menu. And I'm going to give you the choice architecture. And when I control the choice architecture, I can put it to my service rather than to yours. And the point is, all this is going on. What's happening over the last 10 years is that's where this incredible change in margin is coming from. It's not that McDonald's are making cheaper burgers, right? It's that ultimately they're moving you to more expensive items or items that they want you to purchase at a certain time. And the consumer doesn't know they're paying more, right? They're tied up in this beautiful world of behavioral economics. And a word on behavioral economics, I've always found it to be horseshit. I'm sorry, Rory, I love you, but I've always found it to be hand trickery. Ooh, you thought it was blue, but it's red. Can you see how that works? Bum, bum, bum. Ooh, surprise, Superficial, tactical hand trickery. There's one area where I absolutely doff my cap to it, and I say it's probably one of the biggest things in marketing. It's in pricing. Yeah, because if we extend our insights that we are talking about earlier, it's all about profit, and price is the way to drive profit. The way to drive price, as McDonald's are beautifully demonstrating, is with mastery of behavioral economics and the way we frame and anchor and control the choice architecture of our products. Okay, now, note, at no point over the last decade have any consumers gone, this is getting a bit expensive, because it's presented in a beautiful perceptual manner. However, at some point, someone, in this case the journos at Finance Buzz, kind of worked out what was going on. So they looked at what overall inflation had been. This is in the US over the last decade. Inflation's gone up about 31%. And then they looked at prices, specifically at McDonald's, and McDonald's have been gradually charging more and more and more, so that what's ultimately happened is if you look at their average prices for their products, they've doubled, when inflation would have suggested they should have only gone up about 30%. But it's important to note McDonald's got busted not by consumers starting to leave, but by articles from journos who weren't exposed to the hand trickery of behavioral economics doing some basket of goods analysis. So I think what McDonald's have achieved, and now the fact they've been busted, is a very important insight for this year. We've lived through inflationary times, and I think the good companies have learned to increase price and do it in a way which consumers haven't noticed and have responded to. So pricing is a key marketing contribution. I believe behavioral economics has so much to teach us here. And it's all about driving profit, not just sales. Imagine, and come back to my central point. The way we present a price is more important than the price itself. I'm certain of that, okay? Think about a paragraph where the font we write it in is more important than what the font says. And you'll get a long way towards understanding what we could do with pricing in the future. I would also add, though, that we're clearly at the end of a particular era. As we went into COVID, and certainly as we came out of COVID, we've hit incredibly inflationary times. In the UK alone, that big mountain of inflation there meant that marketers had to learn how to do this. I spent a lot of time praising companies like Pret-a-Manger and McDonald's that had learned how to increase price in a manner that did not necessarily decimate sales. But it's also clear as we get to the end of 24 and into 25 that those inflationary times are over. And so there is a change, I believe, coming in pricing. And if you look at what McDonald's are doing now, it's not just lower price saver food, but the way it's presented is now free from our hand trickery of look over here, look over there, move up to one level here. It's back to a basic, good value menu. And that's, again, proof, I think, that McDonald's know what they're doing. Make no mistake, this isn't a critical element of my top to them. McDonald's are doing a bad thing. I think McDonald's have done an amazing thing in extracting optimum value. But it may be time now for them to follow the change in what's going on. For our next adventure into the festive review of the year, we're going to look at consistency at Christmas time. Is there any better time to do it? So what do I mean by consistency at Christmas? So my friends at Kantar produced a really splendid chart just at the start of the festive period. They've done the classic long-short chart. You'll see over there this time that long is on the y-axis. So how well do these ads build brand in the long term? And on the x-axis, short-term effectiveness, okay? And what they did was they presented essentially all the British brands with the big campaigns and where they landed overall. You'll note there's a nice little sort of correlation between the two. We'll talk about that later in the week. But what you see here is congratulations to Cadbury, to KFC, and of course to Coca-Cola, who have essentially won Christmas. Generally, everyone's done all right, but there's a couple of clear winners. But what I'd ask you to do is not look at the brands in this case, but look at the colors attached to their brand names. You'll note that there's either red, a yellow, or a purple. And what those colors indicate are three different types of campaign. The reds are, for want of a better word, old ads that have been run previously, yeah? So Coca-Cola, we talked about it earlier in the week, the holidays are coming ad has been out for 14, 15 years now, okay? It's the exact same ad. The yellows are new ads, but off a existing traditional campaign. We'll talk later this week about Marks and Spencer and their incredible success. One of the things they've done is they've gone back to what was called the food pornography campaign. You know, this isn't just vol au vents, it's M&S vol au vents. Done it in a new way, but it's an existing old campaign given a fresh execution. And then there's purple, which is a completely new ad off a completely new campaign. Now, my point is when you look at those campaigns on those three colors, we can observe quite a clear pattern. If you look at new campaigns, newly created this year from the likes of Lidl or Tesco, what you find is they're doing okay. But they're very much slightly underperforming on brand and a lot underperforming on shorter-term effectiveness. Then if we look at our gold campaigns that are new ads for existing campaigns, they're doing better than new ads, but they're not doing as well as old ads being basically pulled out again and put out there on the airways. Now, this is the exact inverse of what most marketers think, yeah? Most marketers think the purple shit is hot, yeah? New campaigns, yeah? Versus old existing campaigns from bygone times like 2023, old, bad. And so what we're seeing, I think, is a proper insight coming out of some really good research, which is demonstrating clearly to us that old is not bad, old is good. And new, more often than not, is bad. What we've got to do now is convince marketers. Now, what's going on here is very simply the end of wear out. So my favorite chart of this year comes from System 1. They looked at all the ads on their database. We're talking tens of thousands of ads. And they looked at the score of the ad currently, crucially, currently around the current market, based though on how long it had been out in the wild on the air. And as you can see from my scale over here, it's quite the x-axis. So over in that far corner over there, that says 0 to 49 days. So that's an ad that's only been out for about a month. And over here, next to my shoulder, this says 650 to 7,000 days. That means the campaign's been live and running for between 2 and 20 years. Yeah. Now, what happens if we look at the average score for brand building of all the ads based on their time intervals? Okay. Well, over there, as you can see, fresh ads are scoring 2.2 on System 1's 0 to 6 scale. Okay. That's the average. There's good and bad in there, but the average of campaigns that are out there for about a month and a bit is about 2.2. Now, if we look over here at the very old campaign, squeeze them in the corner here, they also score 2.2. We might expect, if marketers were right and young ads were better than old ads, this would be smaller and that would be bigger, but it isn't. And then when we fill in the gaps for all the other time periods, what we observe, and some of you don't have a statistical training, so let me help you with this, is fuck all difference. Yeah. Now they're not all the same because there's a little bit of statistical noise, but it's within the margin of error, within expected boundaries. What we're saying is time is not a variable that affects advertising effect. Okay. Let me say that again. It doesn't matter if you've got a young ad or an old ad in terms of the effect it's going to have on the market. Now that works both ways. If you've got a shit ad, it's pretty much going to stay a shit ad, okay? But the point is, if you've got a good ad, don't try and make a new one. Use the old ad, yeah? We talked about Coca-Cola earlier in the top 10 this week, and it's interesting. The Coca-Cola company clearly kind of get this because they keep rolling out the holidays are coming, which is the quintessential old ad that works. It's actually got better, and more consumers have grown to like it even more over the years. But each year they bring out something else, and they have sort of a minority investment in a second campaign, and that second campaign never performs as well as the holidays are coming. But it's kind of like, oh, okay, you can do something too, though. You can make a new ad over here, and we'll give you 3% of the budget. But by the way, the holidays are coming, and I think it's a perfect example. So what we're seeing is in so many marketing teams an impatience with advertising that isn't reflected in the market. And there's some phenomenal data from America from a company called Phoenix. They looked at more than 100 big ad campaigns that had been effective and had been in the market for at least 2 years. And what they looked at is they found about a quarter of them were pulled or retired because effectively they were properly out of date. And what I mean by that is they were showing a product that was no longer for sale, it was an offer that no longer existed. So they had to be killed. They were out of date. That happens, right? Most of the supermarkets in grocery can't run the same ads again because, of course, new products, new prices. But in 3/4 of the situation where the ads were retired, they were retired for other reasons, which basically means the marketers are getting bored and want a new ad campaign, because that's what marketing does, right? We make new ads. In those cases, when Phoenix went back and tested the ads, the new ads, what they found is, hey, great news. 1 time out of 5, the new ad was better than the old ad, and 4 times out of 5, it was worse. So what marketing teams are mostly doing is spending time and money making the situation worse. Behold the power of modern marketing. So what's the lesson here? The lesson here is learn patience. Yeah, learn that good ads can and should be recycled. You can save a lot of money on creative costs, which can go back to working media costs. That's going to give you a big excess share of voice advantage. And maybe plan for ads to last more than one cycle so you can invest a bit more money in them in the first part. More importantly, this research, I think, has spurred on System 1 and the IPA and young Andrew Tyndall, who's now 16. He's getting old enough to have his own point of view now. Only kidding, Tyndall. To produce what I thought was the best empirical work of the year. And all credit to Andrew and the IPA for working with him. So if you haven't downloaded this report or watched the YouTube presentation, much as it pains me to say it, you should do that and not listen to me, because it's the most important empirical work of the year. And what Andrew has shown, I think conclusively, is a much broader picture of compound creativity. Let me explain what he means by that. So what Tyndall's done is he's gone and looked at the data and he said, right, well, what do we mean by being more consistent in the world of advertising? Well, he split it into 3 different buckets. First, creative foundations. So what he means by that is, before we get to the comms work, are we keeping the same positioning? Have we kept the same campaign idea? And do we have the same agency partner working with us? Yeah. All, in my opinion, essential success factors that often aren't in place, right? Good positioning takes 10 years to work, right? A good agency marriage should last a very long time. Then he's looked at the culture of consistency within the client organization. So does the agency understand the need to have creative wear-in, give it a chance to work? Do they understand the need to have it across channels, maybe different messages, but still consistent? Are they using the same creative assets? And then finally, in the execution itself, we get the main part here, consistent brand assets. Are we using the same brand codes over and over, which is crucial, right? Is it the same tone of voice? Are we using the same fluent device, Specsavers, etc.? Have we committed to a brand slogan for a decade, ideally more, and so on and so on? Basically, we're doing the opposite of what most hot new CMOs do when they come into an organization. Are we doing the same shit? And the reason we should do the same shit is it works better than new shit. And when you look at, in this case, an ESOV maximizer, right, or efficiency. So what we mean by that is, and we'll talk about it again more when we get to Marks and Spencer, you get excess share of voice works anyway, right? If you have a plus 10 excess share of voice, it will generate a certain amount of share of market growth every year. If you do it with existing assets, using an existing positioning, the same agency, the same, you see that gold line there, you get a significant boost to the efficiency of that share of voice because you're effectively using more powerful existing assets than going out and doing it with less consistency in a new way. I'm making this more complex than it needs to be. Old is better than new, right? The older stuff beats the newer stuff. And I would put myself and Tyndall there out there as a fine example of that particular valuing system. Let me show you with M&S how that works, because one of the stories we'll talk about later this week is the incredible resurgence of M&S. Where we've seen that play out, particularly, as you'll see here, is in this Kantar chart. So Kantar have looked at M&S are doing a good job of doing standard excess share of voice work. So what does that mean? If you look at M&S's own estimation, they started the year with just under 4% of the UK grocery market. But as you can see, according to Kantar, in terms of their share of voice among grocery partners, they're up among 8%. 8 minus 4, trust me, I have a PhD, gives us a result of plus 4. Okay, that's an excess. We have more share of voice than share of market. And that means that M&S are going to grow next year if they maintain it and the competitors don't respond. But what's fascinating about Kantar's data is they've also looked at the effective excess share of voice, which, as you can see here, propels them up until the 20th percentile. What does that mean? Okay, they're spending money on great ads, yeah? And they're spending more money than they needed to spend to maintain market share, so they'll grow. But what this tells you is they're so good at advertising that excess is going to really push them even further. And what do I mean by being good? Well, I mean ads that are very creative, ads that are spread across mixed channels, ads that are codified with the distinctive assets that have emotion, pre-testing. But the key point here is ads that are consistent to previous years. M&S have got this memo, and they're using it to secure a significant advantage. And if you read the work of Tyndall, I think you'll see more examples of that. It's very important work, and it's changing the way we think about advertising. And for today's special festive moment, we're going to look at the Grand Prix winning IPA submission from McCain. Let's talk chips. So first of all, a word about, you may not know this, I don't know. So you have, the IPA Effectiveness Awards are the most, respectable prizes in the UK or anywhere else for the most effective ads of the year, judged by the IPA, the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. It is a phenomenal resource to have at our disposal because it's the way that we judge good work using data. And if you ever see an IPA submission, it's a 30 to 40 page document filled with complex data. It's brilliant because it allows us to celebrate the best people. It's brilliant because they also publish the cases and you can learn from them. Now, this year, McCain, the wonderful Canadian food company, won the IPA Grand Prix, which is the best campaign in the UK of the year, for their work around frozen potato chips. And one expert, Les Binet, said it was probably the best ever submission in the history of the IPAs. And I think, as is normally the case with Les, he may well be correct. So what was going on at McCain to spark this 10-year-long campaign that's just won the IPA award? So McCain were a bit fucked, is the standard diagnosis back in about 2014. Private label chips were gradually increasing their grasp in the category. And that was being spurred also by the German discounters, no friends of big brands, and the general commodification of frozen chips. Yeah, it was becoming, like so many categories, not a place where brands were particularly effective. And as a result, McCain, like many other players faced with commodification, reduced sales, began to take the evil drug of sales promotions, essentially making their bad situation worse. And, to the credit of McCain, they put the data in there. So that's a scary situation, yeah? The mountain is starting to collapse. And McCann's revenues are starting to suffer from what was effectively the collapse of one of their most important categories in the UK. What makes McCain different is what they did next. They didn't panic. They didn't overindulge. They stepped back. They understood their market with diagnosis. They developed a proper long-term strategy, and then they executed it brilliantly. And for me, this is one of the great marketing moments of British marketing history, certainly in the last 10 years. So what did they discover? Well, really good insight. And the insight was, in the UK, how we show food in our various Ars Nigella documentaries is very different from how British families actually consume food in their own messy, special ways. And I think the genius of McCann was, first of all, working with Adam and Eve, DDB, was to capture a campaign that emotionally began to show that difference and resonate more with people. So it begins, of course, with positioning. This, for me, is what positioning is meant to be. I'd like to put it up against any other positioning work, all the nonsense we see across all the boardrooms. I mentioned it already in the top 10 earlier. We need a drastic reframing of positioning, and we need it now. Your positioning is shithouse. I love you, but it's shithouse. It's over-complex, overstated, useless shit. And I say that with love and affection, but a desire for you to get better. So this is what good positioning looks like. This is how McCain positioned their brand, having done their research. The joyful reality of family tea time. 6 words, yeah? That's how you do it. We haven't got room for more. We want McCain to be part of this, and we're going to make it part of this by saying this beautifully, creatively, persuasively for a very long time, yeah? And that's exactly what they did. So let me show you the ad. It's a beautiful ad. This is one of the early ones. I mean, there's many ads in the sequence. They're all doing the same thing. They're a work of genius from Adam and Eve. Let's watch that, and then we'll talk about what it did. It's not just this ad, obviously. There's 10 years of these ads, but you'll see how that position, the joyful reality of families, playing out in this beautiful, very subtle ad.
When it comes to family, how much do we really have in common? There's big differences, small differences, leave and remain kind of differences. There's talkers, listeners, the you never listen to me's. Some are proud, and some are proud of who they've raised. There's cat lovers, dog people, the mustn't miss a moment kind of people. There's screen timers and the digital detoxers. Maybe you have faith or worship at the temple of rock and roll, and you debate your differences over chips and cheeseburgers, or vegan cheeseburgers, which you tuck into at dinner, supper, or tea. Whatever you call it, there's no better time to come together. After all, it's differences that make a family. McCain, we are family.
That's a great ad. And we need more ads like that. I mean, when you overdo it and get it wrong, it can, it's annoying. But when it's done with this much taste, it really is, incredibly effective. So what do we got here? We got proper positioning, driving emotional, high-end, long, brand building comms. Proper advertising investment. McCain put the money in as well. This wasn't one of those, we do a little bit of organic and we'll get loads of earned media. And of course, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the salience from McCain, it's McCain, but you're also trying to do the bit we don't talk about enough, which is brand image, that we're all about families of any kind and diversity and realness, right? And emotion, eating is emotion. And I think it's a very brave campaign because it doesn't push McCain too hard. I'd probably say it should have pushed it harder, but as the case study shows, what do I know, right? Now, the key thing about this campaign is it was never meant to sell more chips. And that's why I love it. It was about reducing the price sensitivity of British consumers so that they didn't try and go for the private label chip, that they were able to stomach a very significant price premium from McCain. So there wasn't a job here to, sell more chips. It was protect what we're selling, and maybe once we've done that, get prices up. Let me explain that in a little bit more detail. It's not something we talk about enough, and as good as How Brands Grow is, it's a book about increasing revenues, not about increasing profit, which in my opinion is a miss. So if I offer you a bag of frozen chips for 55p, you'll say that's good value. But if I also then offer you another bag of frozen chips for 45p, you will absolutely, because these are commodities, take the cheaper bag of chips. Once we get into commodification, the cheapest product will almost always win because it's apples against apples. The job of positioning and brand building isn't just salience, it's also differentiation, okay? Because if I can make you think one of these bags is different in a way that you're prepared to pay more for because it's different in what you want, I have a sliver of price insensitivity, which if I'm smart enough to add into my pricing will enable me to make more profit. And so the job for McCain was to essentially set up their frozen chips as being different from other chips. Yeah. In this case, by emotionally connecting to British households and adding what we know is all there, right? Which is long, enduring, meaningful, emotional connections between the brand and things that people care about, right? Beyond the category to some degree. So in that sense, what we can then do is not only justify our price point against cheaper rivals. Well, of course, I'll pay more for McCain. We might even be able to put prices up versus what we used to charge. Yeah, that's the purpose of this campaign. And we see it playing out incredibly in the 10 years. Remember, it does take 10 years that ensue. So taking an index from 2013, we're getting to, essentially reducing price sensitivity by half, meaning that consumers are increasingly comfortable with paying more for chips and paying more than they used to pay for McCain's. As a result, the average price paid for McCain's increased by 48%. Now, careful here. If I go back for a second, just because I get price insensitivity down by half doesn't automatically mean I can charge half. There's two things going on here, right? The ability to reduce price sensitivity, that's a rare skill among marketers. And then the ability to recognize that and charge more price for the product and get that price rise through. These two things are essential, but you rarely see them both so skillfully done. And again, back to a point we made earlier in this top 10 countdown a couple of days ago, when you can increase price, you can do extraordinary things to the overall profitability of a company. In this case, McCain's overall profits, if you take them from 2014, are up about 200 million quid. Yeah, that's an extraordinary result, but it speaks to the power of price in driving overall profitability of the company. Truly, I think this is phenomenal work. I think this is one of the great IPA cases of all time, and that's as high a praise as I can give you. And what I would encourage you to do is two things. Go and join the IPA, and then for 25 quid a go, download the McCain case study, which is a phenomenal learning experience, and then other case studies where you can really learn about the very best marketing done by the best agencies and the best clients. The IPA is a beautiful little jewel in the UK. And I think joining it and learning from it, you don't have to work in advertising to learn for it, is a really important point. Brilliant work from McCain. And here we are with number 5, Oasis Smart Pricing. So I'm sure you saw this if you lived in the UK. Oasis, Mancunian geniuses, are going back after many years of feud to a series of concerts here in the UK and then further afield as well. I saw them the first time round. I'm not going again. But anyway, lots of people wanted to go. They had 17 concerts scheduled in the UK with prices listed at around the £148 mark. And people logged on in their millions to get these tickets. Spent on average 3 hours in the queue waiting to get their chance to buy the tickets. And when they got to the front of the queue, they did indeed find there were tickets left, but the price had more than doubled in the ensuing 3 hours, and they were now being asked to pay 355 quid on average. So the reaction to this, and of course this is, dynamic pricing at its worst, as the number of people buying the tickets increases and the stock of tickets decreases, the algorithm sends the price further and further up, hence the more than double price point. And the reaction among, the British culture was pretty extreme. Robert Smith, who's now in his 60s, Robert Smith labeled the whole thing as a scam and has been very vocal in being opposed to it. And he's a fine man, Mr. Smith, and was very vocal about it. The British government, in this case in the form of Lisa Nandy, described it as incredibly depressing and announced there would be a massive investigation into it because, of course, there's nothing else wrong in the UK, and that's what we need to focus on right now. My favorite response was Robbie Williams, always good value for money. Mr. Williams said, "Hey, I'm on tour next year. I should have done dynamic pricing. Thank fuck those bastards went first." So he was very much interested in the idea and thought, that'll be all right, let's do that. The general consensus in marketing was kind of like, Oasis have really damaged their brand and their reputation. They're working class and they're men of the people. And now they just look like they've all this negative sentiment and they've really hurt themselves, So I think that reflects the fact that all real marketers know about these days is brand and comms, right? I regard what Oasis did as a spectacular success. And it's ironic that I can see it, maybe not correctly, but I would say to you that that's pretty much a perfect play by Oasis. Sure, there's a lot of negative sentiment and a lot of negative headlines out there, and it runs against their northern working class roots, none of which is good. I get it. But you've got to set that off against what did the dynamic pricing provide them as a result? And because most marketers don't understand margin and gross profit, they're going, higher prices, but negative brand. You're going to really lose here. A couple of points, right? Oasis aren't going to tour again after this, right? I mean, maybe in another 25 years before they die, but they're really not bothered. This is their retirement plan, right? You can't quite calculate this, but if I made an educated guess, I would suggest the difference between flat pricing this and a proper dynamic pricing algo run the way they run it, they probably as a band, even when you take the rest of the money away for the other agencies and so on, somewhere between 100 and 200 million quid more money from those gigs. My point to you is that's a lot of money, yeah? And I think what most marketers don't understand is the differential effect of price, right? You get price right, you make money. You get it really right, you make even more money, £200 million more money. This is a linear rather than binary decision-making process. And I think it was a spectacular coup for Oasis. Marketers in general should love dynamic pricing. It's all about segmentation. It's all about managing supply and demand, and it's all about margin maximization. So for all those reasons, we should embrace it. The problem is we don't know what we're talking about a lot of the time, and just because there's a bit of bad comms, we go, "Oh, that's not good." It's really good if we get it right. Now, I don't think Oasis's approach was necessarily exemplary, and there again lies a challenge for marketers, right? We've talked about earlier in our top 10 the importance of price framing and price communications. I think what was missing with the Oasis approach was a smarter way to present and frame the differential prices. Did we have to give them such a low anchor price, for example? Did we have to make them wait for 3 hours without any warning? Could we have done what Ryanair do, which is, I think, a much more sensible approach, which is manage the expectation that you may have to pay more? There were better ways to do it, don't get me wrong. But again, they've sold out at maximal prices. It's not a defeat. It's an incredible victory for Oasis. And people can always not buy the tickets. Do you know what I mean? That's the other part of this. I think an important point in all good pricing is consumers will say to you, "Ooh, that's quite a high price. I need to think about that," or "I need to save up for that." That's not a negative price signal, right? It's a positive price signal, because if you've got really good price research, remember that consumers will be challenged by the price. And second, you will lose some customers who don't want to pay that price. That's the nature of the beast, right? It isn't about maximizing volume, it's about maximizing value. So you have to be ready for people saying, "I didn't buy those tickets, they were too expensive," right? That's inherent in this process. When you get price right, you lose customers. It's only with stupid low prices that everybody sells out and everyone's, "Oh, everything's great. We've all bought tickets and they've sold out. What a great success." But you're 200, 300, 400 million pounds down on where you could have been. Do you see my point? There has to be a little bit of frisson when you get pricing right. And I thought Oasis got it right. Here we are now in the interesting world of number 4 and in the shape of Starbucks positioning. All right, so some ancient history. So back in 2008, Starbucks were having a hard time of it. They all got everyone together in New Orleans. The CEO Schultz and his gang of merry team talked to lots and lots of Starbucks people, and they produced this wonderful Starbucks mission, which was headlined with its equivalent of Starbucks brand positioning. And I'm going to read this slowly, and with a massive tongue in the side of my cheek. Our Starbucks mission is to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. Okay? So I think, and I've been on record as saying this, I think, for about 15 years, that's the worst, or that's not the worst, it's the most stupid bit of brand positioning in the history of brand positioning, yeah? It's everything that's wrong with positioning, and I think it's dumb, yeah? And I'll go into great details why I think it's dumb. Can I just make a point before I get into that, though? I like Starbucks. I had one this morning. I think Starbucks is a really rather wonderful brand. I like their coffee, and I really think the brand is good. I just think Starbucks don't know why it's good, and that's always going to be trouble later on. Do you know what I mean? They don't really understand themselves. It's like a beautiful man or beautiful woman that doesn't realize they're beautiful. It's kind of cute, but at some point it's going to be a shame because they won't work stuff out. Do you know what I mean? So I love Starbucks, and I'm sure they love me, but I really think that their positioning mission stuff is atrocious. Why do I think that? Well, a few things. If you look at it in all of its glory, right, it came, first of all, from staff, from those little seminars where we all sit around and we get a whiteboard and we write things on the whiteboard and everyone's like, "Please don't make me go back to work. I'll say some more things. Let me stay here and talk shit about the brand a bit more, how wonderful it is, how wonderful I feel, how lovely our customers are." You know what I mean? It gets pretty out of control pretty quickly. And what's happening is we're overstating the importance of the brand, because to staff members, it is their working, it's their life. It's what they do. It's what they believe in. It's who pays their salary and their health care. And that's all great. But this isn't an employer value proposition. This is what we're trying to say to consumers. Crucially, it also misses out on all the salience piece. So remember, what Ehrenberg Bass said is correct. Our number one job with positioning is to make sure the brand comes to mind. If the brand doesn't come to mind, what we stand for is of no value to anyone. If I walk down the street going, I need a coffee, I'll go to Pret. You can stand for anything you like. If you didn't come to mind, the game is over, right? Now, the problem with this employee-based stuff is we've got Howard Schultz, the billionaire CEO. All he's thinking about is legacy and what he can do to help the world. Because that's what, if I gave you $1 billion, you wouldn't give a shit about coffee either. You'd be thinking about what can I do to make the world a better place. That's lovely, but it's not what consumers are thinking. And their employees aren't much better, right? The employees aren't thinking about salience because there's a giant fucking mermaid with Starbucks round her neck looking at you 9 hours a day. It comes to mind, right? So for these reasons, when we do this staff-based, flowery, Walt Disney, quasi-cocaine-fueled thing, you sort of get this weird result that isn't Starbucks at all. It ignores completely what the real sort benefits are for the consumer. It ignores who the competitors really are, because there are competitors you wouldn't imagine here. And it ignores what Starbucks really delivers versus what they think they deliver. So it fails the 3 C's test. And the other thing is this big memorandum is like most positioning an end in itself. It's something they want to pin up and look at and stuff. That's not what it is. Positioning is what I want the consumer to think when she thinks about my brand. And in that sense, it has to be much smaller than a 50-word manifesto. The worst moment wasn't then, though. A couple of CEOs later, and a decent CEO that came in from Reckitt Benckiser. So everyone was expecting a better marketing outfit. So in comes the new CEO, and he announces a new positioning project. I'm thinking, well, we're going to get there now. This is so that he actually doubled down. He went, hold my Starbucks. I think I can do worse than that. And this is what they came up with in 2022. You ready? With every cup, with every conversation, with every community, we nurture the limitless possibilities of human connection. Fuck me, right? Look at that. We nurture the limitless possibilities of human connection. They're on drugs, metaphorically, I hope, but that's nonsense, right? Step back and look at it with me for a second, right? Remember, this is positioning, right? You've been to Starbucks. Have you ever been to Starbucks to nurture the limitless possibilities of human connection? No. Are there other competitors out there that do that better? Yeah, like, I don't know, Apple or Google, right? That's where I go for that shit, right? Does Starbucks actually deliver on any of this? No, they definitely don't, and they don't need to. So for me, it was just, the exact nonsense. So all this nonsense, overstating your importance. When you understand your fundamental unimportance as a brand, you position it properly. You go for a small thing, yeah? And you don't go for this big nonsense. So in contrast, I've been using this all year. Let me show you what good positioning looks like. I've been stalking Wael and the team at Nestle for years so I could get their official global brand position and share it. And I think it's as good as I thought it was going to be. So Kit Kat, a well-positioned brand that you should copy in your approach too. So Kit Kat has its positioning on a page. That would be the first clue. Second, Kit Kat starts with its brand codes, distinctive brand assets, the brown chunks, the Pantone, the famous slogan from JWT, have a break, have a Kit Kat, and obviously the logo. 4 brand codes. And that's it, right? And then there's the positioning, all 5 words of it. Breaks are good for you. That's it. There isn't like a prism or an onion or a purpose or a personality matrix, right? They're not the magician and the cowboy. Breaks are good for you. That's what we believe, right? Now, if you're stupid or you're not experienced, you're going to look at that and go, well, that's not, I've got a brand prism over here. Look at my rhomboid, right? This is what good looks like. You must trust me. I've positioned more billion-dollar brands than you have or anyone else has. This is what good looks like, okay? It's tight. It's focused. It's got the distinctiveness and differentiation piece, and they haven't changed this in a decade. So behold what good looks like, right? Perfect positioning. Yeah, relative differentiation, beautiful, and realistic. And don't forget the presence of those distinctive brand assets. It's part of your positioning challenge. So with 2024, we've got a new CEO, Brian Nichol. He's getting a lot of shit because he's remote working from, I think, Arizona, wasn't it? But more importantly, I think Nichol may well be onto this. He's dropped a couple of hints recently. He said we need to fundamentally change our strategy to win back customers. And we need to get back to the brand's core identity. So I wonder if over the holiday period, we might see in the new year a better, more prosaic, more effective positioning. So Starbucks can grow around it and know itself better. I do hope so. If you want to avoid being Starbucks, there are just a few simple questions. Positioning is a shit show in most companies, right? Probably including yours. You need to rip it up. You need to ask it. Let me give you the test to see whether you need to rip it up. Number one, is your total positioning on one page? If it isn't, you're screwed. Have you used extensive consumer data to build your position? Not employee data, consumer data. Have you had it for at least 10 years? Positioning is a long-term game, right? Like Kit Kat stuff's 40 years old nearly, right? Has it been unchanged over time? Do you have your brand codes, distinctive assets, distinctive brand assets, whatever you call them, are they part of your positioning? They're just as, probably more important than the actual positioning statement. Is it tight? Definition of tight, do you know what it is without PowerPoint or that little brand book? Yeah, because you need to know it all the time. And has it been sold in? If I ask the porter, the man selling stuff at the front of the house, right? Do they know what it is, and are they able to operationalize it? Because they're much more important as a touch point than you. These are the real challenges of positioning, and I find most companies are nowhere near it. So let's hope for Starbucks. Fine brand, needs to know itself better. Here's your hints, Brian. Off you go. But we're getting now to the tip of the spear, because here we are with number 3, Nike's CEO crisis. So here's old John Donahoe, formerly of eBay and various other companies, looking pretty good at the start of 2024. He's slashed some cost. He's applied his principles. Share price a little tweaky there. And then suddenly, when we get to the turn in the year, as we say in finance circles, the arse drops out of his share price. It causes a spectacular kerfuffle, and Donahoe is gone within about 6 weeks to be replaced by a Nike long-termer who'd left the business for the first time because he didn't get the CEO's job, and then he came back. And it will or won't be the savior of Nike, we'll see. So this one's all about what Nike got wrong and what we can learn from the wrongness, okay? Now, to understand where all the wrongness comes from, you've got to step back for a second and note that when Donahoe started his position was at the beginning of 2020, at the beginning of COVID, okay? Now, why is that important? Well, it's because people like Martin Lindstrom were operating in a special place at that point. Let me explain. So, Mr. Lindstrom, I've done conferences with before. I think it's nonsense what he says at the conferences, well-meaning nonsense, but it's rubbish. He sells lots of airport books, biology, for example. In this case, biology, the coronavirus edition. That's going to be important in a minute. And so what Mr. Lindstrom said, so I'm old now, right? I'm almost as old as Martin. And so when COVID hit, I knew what was going to happen. A whole bunch of wannabe gurus were going to try and corral COVID and tell you that everything was going to, the change monkeys, as I call them, we're going to all tell you everything has changed. You know, drop your pants, buy this book, learn how the rules have completely changed, right? And it's time to do it differently, the coronavirus way. And just to make that clear, this is the kind of shit Mr. Lindstrom was ushering forth on LinkedIn in 2020. This change, this is COVID, is so profound that one can talk about a global synchronization of human behavior, establishing a completely new universal change of consumer patterns by my book. Now, I got out in front of it and suggested that was horseshit. And what I suggested, even though it wasn't going to make me any money, because there isn't Martin, I'm sure, will make a lot of money from the coronavirus version of his book. Everything has changed. There isn't a lot of money in me turning up here and going, nah, we pretty much go back to normal. But that's what I was saying. And I talked about the boring brown line of continuity in my articles. And what I meant by that is I took loads of examples of, searches for men's suits, cinema attendance, the Zoom share price, online sales, which will be particularly relevant. And I showed how during the COVID period, they all went mental. And all of the change monkeys told you that was a paradigmatic change in society. Whereas old cynical people like me said, the reason why people are doing more online sales is they can't get out of their house. And when they can get back out of their house and COVID is over, the sales will snap back to the trend line, to the boring brown line of continuity, not to where they were pre-COVID, but where they would have been had COVID never happened in 2022-23. Now, out of the four I picked, they all proved to be prescient. Maybe cinema audiences is the one that still came back a lot. Not as much as we wanted, because it turns out, and this is a different story, the movie studios wanted to kill the cinema chains and use this as an opportunity. But for the most part, I was right. And we ended up in 2024 pretty much where we would have been anyway, irrespective of COVID. And by the way, I treat working from home in the same way. At some point, we were going towards a 4-day week. We'll get to a 4-day week. It just will take a lot of time with new contracts and so on. My prediction is that will happen too. Anyway, why is this relevant for Nike? Well, old John Donahoe started his job just as COVID was kicking in, and he would have looked at things like online sales as a proportion of total retail sales, and he would have seen this, yeah? Wow, look at that. Now, he would have gone as a sort of tech CEO, everything's going digital, I need to spank everything that way. Because, of course, I'm going to extrapolate that line into nonsense land. What happened, of course, is the boring brown line of continuity kicked in, and we went back to where we would have been. But O'Donoghue's strategy was set. And many of the things you'll see here come out of that elementary error. Specifically, he went hard on direct-to-consumer, wanting to grow digital sales from 1/4 to 40%. Why did he want to do that? He wanted to keep his margins. He wanted the customer proximity and relationship with his members. What he missed was omnichannel always wins. Stop forcing everyone to think about D2C and buying online, because the two fluid relationships between buying online and seeing it in store are actually two parts of the same whole. I've said this to people who've said, D2C is dead. No, it's not. It's great. Retail sales are dead. No, it's not. They both are necessary. And for different brands, they'll pull it in different ways. But when you get someone that has an agenda based on a false diagnosis, pushing D2C too much, trouble will ensue. Product also matters. So I was skeptical of this one, but apparently Donahoe had basically collided all the teams into men, women, and kids. He got rid of a lot of the athletic teams. The product development was very much about what do consumers currently want, not more sort of line extension products that were about brand image. And I was sort of, surely he's not that stupid. But having visited Nike stores, especially in the States for the last 12 months, I don't know if you've been in one, it's a spectacularly generic, yoga-ish kind of experience. They've taken all the hot out of it. And it is palpable when you're in there. Finally, of course, he went heavy on short performance digital comms and began to pull away from longer form brand building stuff. And of course, that's the quintessential error here, right? So remember, there are, let's do it one more time. There's long and short, yeah? And they both work differently. If we take a classic bit of Nike performance marketing, I'm going to take a specific shoe. I'm going to target a particular membership segment base. I'm going to offer them that shoe as a exclusive or a price premium, and I'm going to see if they're going to buy it from me. That's great stuff. Nothing wrong with it. As we spend money on that kind of promotion, we do hundreds of them, what we see is we invest a bit of money in it, sales go, ooh, and then once we've done it for a certain point in time and we stop doing it, sales go back to base. That's cool. The amount of money we spent making the sale happen is more than returned with a wonderful ROI. But of course, according to Field and Burnett, there is a second pattern of growth. There is the long of it. Now, the long of it doesn't ask anything of the consumer. There isn't a click or a sale. And it's aimed usually at everyone in the sophisticated mass market. It's a big billboard ad reminding everyone Nike, 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 salience. And then Nike is about this and this. Yeah. Often there's no product. Can be, but often there's no product. This is the long of it. And we know this is more incremental. We know this is slower. We know it's harder to prove an ROI, which doesn't mean it isn't giving us that, but it's much harder to show. And crucially, of course, it isn't to be seen as separate from short. The long sets up the short to work better. The short makes more money. The short pays for the long. And that positive cycle, the opposite of what we saw at Nike, now takes place. It's really, if there's one criticism of the long and the short of it, it would be that the names are wrong. It isn't just long and short, yeah? It's bigger than that. So if you think about it very simply, the long is top of funnel, the short is bottom of funnel. The long is about your brand position and salience. Your short is about a product position and selling a particular product. The long is about more emotion. Short can be more rational. We do short stuff for Mini MBA where we get all the people that have signed up for more information about the course, but they haven't actually committed to the course. And a week before the course runs, we send them a digital bit of comms saying, the course is about to start, you can still sign up. That's very rational. It's also very effective. The long is building the brand equity. The short is activating and harvesting it for value. The long, crucially, is 1, 2, 3 big campaigns a year. As we've seen in earlier parts of the top 10 this year, maybe campaigns that run across many years, but there aren't many of them. The short, there are hundreds of them, yeah? Targeted, different products at different times for different segments at different occasions, test and learn, completely different cadence. And the big challenge for marketers is, while we can absolutely correctly measure the short-term comms with ROI, we spent 28 grand on that campaign saying, hey, you can still join up for the Mini MBA with a week to go, and we generated 200 grand's worth of value. We can run the numbers and say, what's the marginal value of the 200 grand versus the 28 grand we spend? There's an ROI. For the long of it, it's much harder to do that. Now, you can use econometrics, yada, yada, yada. It never really gets you there. It's better to recognize just because we can't prove a direct ROI doesn't mean it isn't giving it to us in very complex ways. Now, one other key point that has come out more recently, thanks to the work of System 1, we can also say that the long drives the short, but the favor is not returned. What do I mean by that? If we take the System 1 analysis, which you remember looks at the long of it down here on the x-axis on a scale of 1 to 6, and looks at the short of it over there in terms of this stuff here is how well will we build brand, that stuff over there is how well will an ad sell product. We've actually got a little dotted line, which is the average short of it. Are we above the line and we're performing better, or below the line performing worse? So what System 1 do beautifully is capture the long and the short for every ad. So if we take a particular ad, for example, and it's tested by System 1 and we know it's accurate, and it ends up sitting here, what that tells us is it's under average in terms of its brand building capabilities, and it's actually under average off underneath the line in terms of its ability to sell product. If we put all of the ads System 1 have ever tested in the UK, which would be, these are US, 44,000 ads, it doesn't matter, it's the same pattern, and we put every single pink dot they've ever tested onto a chart, what you see is an interesting pattern, yeah? Look over here at the 5-star and above. So these are the best campaigns. This is like the top 1%, 2%. Now, if you look at their clustering, what you'll observe is almost all the ads that are 5-star for brand building, look, they're all above the line for short as well. What does that mean? It means long drives short. If you're good at brand building, look, you're good at selling products as well. That's a very important insight. And you can prove it because as we move down this axis that way, so as we get less good at brand building, you'll also note the pink dots are dropping down here as well. By the time we get to a 1-star brand building ad, that's pretty shithouse, you're also seeing that only about a quarter of them are above the line for performance. If you're good at brand building, you're good at the short of it. If you're shit at brand building, you're bad at the short of it. Long drives short. The reverse, however, is not true. That's the key asymmetry here. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take the same data. If short drove wrong, what we would see is all the good short stuff above the line here should all be clustered up in this section here, right? Because if you're good at short, you should also be good at long, so there should be a clustering up here and not much over there. We don't see that. Instead, what we see is an orthogonal picture, no real pattern at all. That number you can't see is 15%. So 15% of ads which are, doing this are also doing that. And as you can see, that number is almost random up the top there. There isn't a clustering over here at all. Short does not drive long. And that's a shame because most companies are over-investing in short. And as a result, they're not getting enough brand value, which ironically down the track means they won't get enough performance from their short as well. So long drive short, short doesn't do much for long. That's the key point that I think many companies have missed. So it's more than just long and short. You need both. You also need them in the right combination. It's not 60-40. It may be very different from that. It depends on the category and the dynamics you're in, but you need to get them right. And if you get them right, as we see, long will drive short performance, but not the other way around. That's a problem for most companies because they're obsessed with ROI. They've got marketers that have come out of a digital background, like Donahoe, who don't really get it, and are obsessed with spending too much on performance at the expense of brand building. What happens in those situations, which Nike illustrates beautifully, is it can work for a while, for 1 or 2 years, because Nike has built this reservoir of brand equity and salience, which an overinvestment in short can live off and actually do well on for a while. But as the long eventually fades in a long, slow fashion, it begins to remove that demand, that price insensitivity, that salience. And as it does so, what happens is the short stops working as well. And in the end, when that stops working, the CEO gets fired and everything has to be reset. You've just got to get the right balance, and you've got to believe in the balance and not neglect either side of the equation. A sad, but I think salutary lesson from Nike. Okay, here we go. You ready? We're at number 2 in my festive top 10. It's getting pretty wintry and pretty Christmassy, and that means it's time to talk about one of the good stories of the year, M&S returns. So I am physically made from M&S. This is an earlier version of me when my body fat was 0.2%. This is from about 1979. And here I am dressed head to foot in Marks & Spencer's fashions, I use that word loosely, and fed extensively from a variety of Marks & Spencer's food, including, of course, Battenberg cake, meatballs, and chili con carne. I grew up on this stuff. In fact, my dad is behind my green screen. Is that not true, Father?
Very true.
Thank you. So we were an MS household. We were a working class household with, aspirations for a little bit more middle classness. And M&S was the place you went because you felt like you were still saving money and doing the right thing, but it was a little bit better than going to the other supermarkets. It was a little bit nicer. It had that little bit of class to it. And that's been the role of M&S now for 100 years. Value and quality. Now, that looks very generic, okay? It isn't. There is, in M&S, a magical special relationship in equilibrium between the right amount of value and the right amount of quality, and they surround each other in stasis. In periods in M&S's history, which I've studied quite a lot, when they start getting a little bit too expensive, the arse drops out of the market because they're not good enough value and they're not M&S enough. If they get a little bit too cheap and cheerful, the arse drops out of their market again because M&S isn't meant to be, like the co-op. It's meant to be a little bit better. And so the job of M&S was always to balance things out and stay in equilibrium. It's a very difficult job, but one where if you can do it right, not just the salience, but the emotion attached to M&S and its heritage for people like me, and there's a lot of us in that sort of upper working, lower middle class British families, means there's really no other brand like it. I got quite emotional about the success of M&S this year. I love Tesco. I just wouldn't feel that way about Tesco. M&S has something else in there, tied up with my mum and my nana and the whole community of M&S that we all remember as kids. So it's been a very tricky 21st century, though. A 21st century downturn for M&S starting around 2008 that's been very tough for them. We saw a very changing retail picture in the UK. Remember, M&S does both food and fashion and homewares, and on both sides, it's getting attacked now by incredibly good competition. In food, we have the likes of Aldi, Tesco's resurgence, Waitrose doing a much, much, much better job. This is the most competitive food market in the world for me. And on the fashion side, you've got Zara, H&M, Amazon. We used to have Topshop. You know, the turn of the century, you couldn't have imagined harder competitors to face off against. And it left M&S in this shrinking, unfortunate place of the middle. And either people were above them or below them and taking away their hinterland. And it got to the point where food was doing okay, but there were real questions in the last 10 years about whether M&S could keep selling fashion and food like it was. Did it need to get rid of fashion and just focus on food? It was a tough time. And yet we've seen M&S, I think in the last 3 years, with Archie Norman as chairman, an amazing team running it, and now at a place where I have to say, I've bought a lot. I don't take stock tips from a marketing professor. I'm no Scott Galloway, but I've bought a lot of stock in M&S. I believe they're gonna kill, and all the signs are good for the long-term revival of this amazing brand. And no one's happier than me. So what's at the heart of M&S's revolution? Well, number one, positioning first. So what M&S have done is gone back to understand their history, articulated it in a way that everyone gets, and they're offering you a 21st century of what they offered in the 20th century. Now, that's not the same thing. It's not roller skates and avocados, right? It's new, but it's new in a way that's consistent to what M&S has always done best, right? There's a lot of discussion about international sourcing. You know, M&S used to be, if you go back 50 years, all British sourced, British made. Now they're internationally sourced. That's not an inconsistency. If you understand that we need the best quality at the best value, you can't get that from England anymore. So you see how the positioning doesn't just make you do the same thing. Sometimes it makes you do the opposite of what we used to do in order to stay consistent. And that's a nuance I think many brands miss. So they've got their positioning, they know what they're talking about, and they're back to delivering it. Back to an earlier thing we covered 4 or 5 days ago, I think M&S have worked out their best advertising was behind them. Why don't we go and get it and pull it forward? So if you're British, you'll know that around about 15 years ago, they ran a campaign known variously as food pornography. The idea was that you would have these long lingering shots of blancmange and Christmas pudding and steak, and the voiceover while they played Fleetwood Mac's Albatross, you know, the voiceover would say, "This isn't just a meringue. This is a Marks and Spencer's meringue." You know what I mean? And it was wildly successful. And then they stopped it because, you know, marketers are idiots. What they've done is brought it back. And they've brought it back in a better way because now they take the ad and have actual consumers interact with it. Let's take one look at the modern food pornography campaign. Spectacular, brilliant stuff.
The next train on platform 1 is succulent M&S Scottish salmon, perfectly pan-seared.
Ultra HD TV with trifle. The best ever from M&S. Fruity compote and tons of vanilla custard.
I just can't wait to get home to cauliflower, bubbling in mature cheddar sauce. Classic M&S.
Detroit pizza with smoky sausage and pulled pork bits and a 3-cheese combo.
This is not just salmon. This is M&S salmon, drizzled in a rich hollandaise sauce. Et voila. This is not just food. This is M&S food. Dig in.
You see my first 2 bullet points though, right? It's the perfect encapsulation from a consumer platform point of view of that positioning of value and quality. You know, this isn't just food, it's a little bit better, right? So it was always a perfect campaign, and Sherry and the team have brought it back. And we'll see more of this in the 10 years to come now from other brands realizing, what are we doing? You know what I mean? I'd like to highlight the Hilton at this moment. I've always stayed at Hilton's my whole life. It's all my favorite brands. If there's anyone from the Hilton out there, can you listen to me? Your current brand positioning slogan is, "It matters where you stay," right? I think that's, no offense, I think that's pathetic. It matters where you stay. You used to have a slogan which was, "Take me to the Hilton." Please change it back. You can do it in 10 years and find out I'm right, or you could do it now. Take me to the Hilton. Anyway, what's next? Brand revitalization. So what you're seeing now, they understand the position. They know they have to be a modern version of the past. And you're seeing this brilliant, what does quality mean now to British people? It means animal welfare. It means looking after British farms. So they're doing more and more of that because what quality and value means is different, and they have to stay ahead of it. Excess share of voice. We talked about it a couple of sessions ago, a couple of days ago. They've committed to investing more than their market share in food, for example. They're at 4%. They've got 8% market share. And so what that means is they're going to get that growth. Remember, excess share of voice is the real deal. And if you want to grow, and M&S is growing, you have to outspend your market share in the sector, and they're doing that. But again, to the point you made earlier in the week, Kantar are also showing us that they're doing it with effectiveness. So they're getting 20 points in the end of excess share of voice because it's more budget invested in, as you've seen there, more creative, more differentiated, more emotional work, which is beating the competition, not just for media spend relative to share, but quality as well. A diverse media mix. If you look at the way M&S are spending their money, they believe in TV, which remains our best brand building tool, whether you like it or not, whether you got the memo or not. They're doing outdoor. They're doing great digital work. They're using TikTok for each of their individual stores and letting the stores do their own work on TikTok. So there's a real sense here of all those multiple channels all serving the brand. In food, they're actually using their own in-house agency, which is causing enormous problems for a lot of agency people because the work can't be as effective or as creative as an external agency. Their brand of the year, according to Kantar, their brand of the year, according to Marketing Week, and at least on the grocery side, they're a fully in-house agency. They've discovered Always On. When you talk to the team, one of the things traditionally M&S did was they obviously advertised through Christmas and January sales. When they got to early summer, they would come off their advertising spend, coming back on again for back to school. So there's a good 2-3 month sort of gap. Now, we know from everyone's discussion, it's better to be always on than to be phasing in and out. M&S discovered that, and for the last couple of years, they've been spending across the whole 12 months. There's two things happened as a result of that. The first one is suddenly they're realizing, our swimwear was really good all along. It's just we weren't advertising. And second, you don't have to spend to come back on again in September. It's much more efficient just to stay on all the time. So I think we're seeing a perfect example of Always On. One thing that strikes you when you talk to the product team, and I'm getting closer and closer to them, is they're all involved in product. If you talk to Anna and the fashion team, it's a remarkable turnaround, but it wasn't just a new ad campaign. They went through literally all the products and reviewed them and changed them and working with the product team, the product's at the heart of it. I don't think you can be a marketer and not be involved in the product all the time. And the best bit about it, so I spoke to they've kind of got two senior marketers, right? Shari, who runs their food business, and Anna, who runs the clothing and Owen's business. And when I talked to them both, it was like, what's the plan for 2025? And they both said the same thing, just more of the same. That's the right answer. What they're saying is, we've got it. We're not in love with change. We've got to keep our foot on the throat of growth, and we know what we're doing for the next few years, right? And that's the best answer of all. When you've got the strategy right, just keep doing it. It's lovely to see M&S winning, and it's lovely to see some of the best principles, nothing fancy, but the best principles of marketing being applied. We've reached our zenith, the number one marketing moment. I don't think anyone's going to query it, right? We're going to talk about Jaguar. Of course we are. I think everyone would agree it was the big moment of the year. What your take on it is probably a different story. So as you know, Jaguar produced a very special new launch campaign, a 30-second ad, and then a week or so later launched the new car. The word on the street and the debate we had was really about rebranding or brand revitalization. So let me be clear how that all plays out and what my logic was. So many people were saying, here it is, the new Jaguar, you can't, they were losing money. They didn't have any real demand. They were an old brand, so they had to create something completely new, throw away their logo, their distinctive assets, their old positioning. The whole thing had to go. We needed something new. Or they would have ended up like poor old Saab over there who didn't change. And I think that's a false binary opposite. My point to the person who was quite emotionally making this point to me was, no, because, what about Volvo, who've successfully, wonderfully got into the electric marketplace while still retaining that nice Scandic, safe, boring set of associations and codes. They've managed to find a brand new version of the past. What about Mini, which for me exemplifies how to do it right? The electric Mini is the perfect version of the traditional Mini, of the petrol Mini. They've kept many of the codes, the round circle in the middle of the driving dashboard, the Mini, the Union Jacks, the logo, but they've evolved it as well. And one of my challenges with what Jaguar are doing is when you go through a major change and you want to revitalize, you need to retain also the indicators of the past, but do them in a fresh way. And my feeling was they'd thrown too much out with the bathwater, and that was my initial take. Certainly different from many other people. Another more minor point would be I didn't really buy the copy nothing thing, right? So, I sort of got what they were trying to do, but I don't think they executed it. I think the woman with the sledgehammer was a direct ripoff of the woman from the Apple ad. The sledgehammer, the orange shorts, the white hair. It was too close for coincidence, right? So that's not copy nothing. Even the car, I know it looks, in its current format, it's kind of, it's pink and stuff. This is a Saab prototype from 2006. I think it's pretty generic, I have to say. I don't think it looks like a Jaguar as much as it should. So I wasn't buying the whole, we've been that radical, actually. I'd have preferred something more radical from a Jaguar base. There were all kinds of other issues came up, right? So everyone went on there. Everyone's talking about it now, and they weren't talking about it before. Fair enough. I mean, salience is a key point. My only challenge at that point is, why do we have to have so much negative chat? Can't we try and go for both positive and lots of chat? It's harder to do, but I'd argue if you can get salience and positivity and on brand, it's a much better win than, the Hitler approach of everyone's talking about me now. You know what I mean? I really disliked what the boss at Jaguar said, that people who didn't like it were showing vile intolerance, yeah? The sexuality and racial origins and orientations and all the other stuff got nothing to do with this at all. And I don't like him using it any more than the Daily Mail using it, if I'm honest with you. You're allowed to not like this because it's bad. Yeah, some of us aren't racist or homophobic. We just don't like the work. I thought that was pretty poor. What I really didn't like also about the Jaguar campaign is it's great you're talking about inclusivity and diversity, but when you open up with, we're going to lose 85% of our existing customers, that doesn't sound that inclusive to me. It doesn't sound like you're celebrating diversity to me. It sounds like you've got a really superficial, two-dimensional perspective of diversity and inclusivity, which it's all about certain people being included and other people, yes, older, fatter, yes, accountants, I'll use that word, driving Jaguars, not being invited to the party. I think that sucks. I think everyone should be invited. I think that was the definition of inclusivity as it was intended. And given it's our final Christmas edition, I'll celebrate my real Christmas love, Professor Byron Sharp, who taught me many things in life. A love of very fine wine being one of them, but another one was inclusivity. Byron's point, and it took a long time for everyone else, including me, to work it out, was it looks very peculiar when marketers start talking about, we don't want those guys, we want those guys, which is what we all used to do, right? In order to build a brand, you can't be for everyone. You've got to be for those guys and not for those guys, right? Byron's point is, I don't agree. Now his point is commercial, right? Why would you exclude anyone from your brand? If you want to come, right? My point is, it's also pretty politically shithouse too, right? If you're going to use inclusivity, let's just not apply it to certain fractions of the population. Let's apply it to everyone. What the Jaguar team should have said, if they really want to do this properly, is we want everyone to love the electric Jaguars. We're inviting everyone to this party, yeah? We're not going to lose 85% of our existing customers. They're going to come with us into the new world of electrified vehicles. We welcome them. We want them. and we want young people, and we want people that are looking for a fashionable car. These guys are using a very old-fashioned exclusionary playbook and dressing it up as being tolerant and inclusive. It's the opposite of that. And I have a problem with it on a political correctness point. I have a bigger problem from it on a strategic point of view, right? These days, I think it's very clear where we're at, right? You define the sophisticated mass market, and if you have the budget, you build your brand to everyone, yeah? You build it to schoolboys who won't buy a car for another 50 years. You build it to everyone that could be potentially in your market, right? Now, when you do your activations and we've got cars and we want you to come look at the cars, then you target particular groups, and I get that. But why exclude people at the brand level? It makes no sense. And there were other things missing from the strategy that I thought were poor. Not having any cars for a couple more years, and it might even be longer. It's great, everyone's talking about you now. We've now got silence for the next 2 years, right? Wouldn't it have been better? I mean, the executives kept talking about luxury at Jaguar, right? Having worked for a long time with luxury brands, they missed an enormous trick here, right? And the enormous trick was you could have handmade, and I appreciate this is incredibly difficult to do, but possible. You could have handmade in the next 12 or 18 months a dozen cars and sold them at a ridiculous price, yeah? That would have given you your premium line extension. It would have given you something to talk about. It would have given you luxury associations. It would have given you couture cars that would have then enabled you to trickle down. Having no cars and then lots of cars, that ain't luxury. Trust me. You want to make a handful, and then you want to open it slowly from automotive down to everyone else. I thought that was a real missed opportunity. Now, having said that, I want Jaguar to win and I want it to be successful. I own a Land Rover, a Defender. I adore the car. I like British cars. I hope they win. And I hope I'm very, very wrong in the 2, 3, 8 years before we see the cars. And I suspect, unfortunately or fortunately, that what we might see is Jaguar being sold to the Chinese. Because the big problem with all of this isn't the marketing. It's the last bullet point, right? I'll tell you a story before we finish. I used to work with private equity companies occasionally who'd go in and want me to assess a brand that they were thinking of buying. And I'd say to them, I once valued a large watch retailer, global watch retailer. I went around, looked at the brand, looked at the numbers, blah, blah, blah. And I said to them, why do you want to buy these guys? And the guy said, from private equity, said, we don't. We want to buy a hard luxury retailer with a global presence because we know that category is going to go up 40%. And these are the guys that are for sale. That's a different way of thinking than how marketers think, yeah? We start with brand, and then we work from there. Private equity guys who are fundamentally smarter than us go, nah, never mind the brand. If you're in a good category and you're an average brand, everyone's going to do well, right? Now, that's the opposite here for Jaguar. They're entering, or eventually will enter, a category which is in flux, which is low margin, which is now being dominated by the Chinese, and in which companies like Volkswagen, BMW and Porsche are struggling to negotiate. Gulp. So I wish Jaguar well. I think it'll take 3 or 4 years before we get the full Monty. I'm certain, however, that if you're going to revitalize a brilliant brand like Jaguar, you had to do it with more taste and sensitivity and skill than what we saw from them. Okay, that's the end of my top 10. I want to thank you for joining me this Christmas. I'm going to now drink myself stupid on Advocar for the next 6 or 7 days. And I'll see you bright and early in 2025. And a special shout out to the mini MBAers, all 40,000 of you now. Have a good Christmas, guys, and we'll see you in the new year for alumni events. Take care, everyone. Merry Marketing Christmas.